Before records, music was performed live and distributed as sheet music. Song promoters would travel around and perform the music, trying to increase sales. People would often purchase these song sheets to perform at home on the piano in their parlors, which was a room in the house designed for entertaining guests, a precursor to what we might call the living room. The most popular song sheets were the hit songs of the day. Then, in 1877, Thomas Edison invented the phonograph and established a record production company in 1887 that would become Columbia Records, one of the first record labels. These early records produced by Columbia were made of wax so that the sound waves could be imprinted into the soft material. The first records were only able to hold up to 3 minutes of music. This technological limitation is largely why we became accustomed to the idea that a song should be around 3 minutes long. In 1901, the Victor Talking Machine Company began producing the Victrola, one of the most important inventions for popularizing recorded music. It was a relatively compact machine that many people could afford, and as you see in the advertisement pictured in the right-hand corner of the slide, it offered the listener all forms of music and performers in one box. With the Victrola, you could have the music of the world right in the comfort of your own home. Not everyone was happy about the popularity of the Victrola. In the Daily Forward of 1904, a somewhat elitist critic writes, "God sent us the Victrola, and you can't get away from it, unless you run to the park. As if we didn't have enough problems with cockroaches and children practicing the piano next door. It's everywhere, this Victrola, in the tenements, the restaurants, the ice cream parlors, the candy stores. You lock your door at night and are safe from burglars, but not from Victrola." We might laugh at this outdated critique, but perhaps we've become so accustomed to the presence of recorded music everywhere that we don't realize how strange the phenomenon actually is, especially considering the proliferation of music now in public spaces. Digital media players put music directly in our ears wherever we are. Music can be found on elevators, piped through speakers in restaurants, and used to promote every kind of product in advertising. Without a doubt, the Victrola and recorded sound brought a profound change that has huge implications for society. The technical term for the phenomenon that changed music forever is schizophonia. Schizo means to cut, and phonia means sound, so schizophonia is the splitting of sound from its original source. We tend to take this for granted, but it is quite a magical phenomenon if you really think about it. Starr and Waterman discuss this phenomenon in their book, American Popular Music. Sound recording introduces a gap between the original context and meanings of music, its connections to community life and individual identity, for example, and its existence as sound, a purely acoustic phenomenon that can be reproduced and consumed by a huge audience. With recordings, it's now possible to listen to music outside of its cultural context. For instance, you don't have to be living in the rural South, sitting on a porch in the heat of the day to experience the sound of the blues. You wouldn't have to be a participant in the communal courtship rites of an African tribe or the community of dancers in a European waltz. You could dance to the music at home all by yourself, which, of course, is the antithesis of the way the music was intended as a communal activity, something you do with your tribe or town. Because of the schizophonia of recorded sound, music has, in a way, become more of an individual practice. But another way to look at schizophonia is that it actually expands the tribe or town. It connects the individual to a much bigger community. Now, through recorded sound, we can be connected to different cultures without actually being with or in those cultures. This is the creation of a new kind of superculture, a mass culture. As Starr and Waterman explain, recorded music has become a medium by which people who will never meet face-to-face communicate with one another over wide geographical and cultural distances, and thus an important basis for the creation and constant reinvention of a distinctively American culture. This new culture formed by recorded music is a distinctively American culture, because what is more American, more democratic than this idea? The idea of the Victrola, that all cultures are welcomed and given equal opportunity to be heard. It should be no surprise then that popular music would become one of the great American cultural exports. Recorded music seems to be an embodiment of the American democratic ideal itself, and a necessary uniting force for a nation of immigrants. This is why American popular recordings seem to be one of the best ways to study American social change. Let's look at two more important developments in the recording industry of the mid-20th century. By 1948, records were no longer made out of wax. The use of vinyl as a material allowed for smaller grooves and higher sound quality. The smaller grooves also made room for more content. The big breakthrough in the late 1940s, then, was the LP, or long-playing record. This gave rise to the idea of the album, which would take a few decades to really develop artistically. Artists didn't really make the most of the idea of the album until the late 60s and early 1970s, however. Throughout the 1950s and early 60s, listeners were focused on the single, which was popular because of the stackable 45 RPM single produced by RCA Victor. Now listeners could arrange their favorite songs in whatever order they wanted, an early form of the modern digital playlist. The popularity of the single meant hit songs were a hot commodity, and major labels were always searching for the next big hit. Major labels had many methods for trying to find and establish the next hit, but one of the most effective ways involved the independent record companies. These independent record companies had a more narrow focus than the major labels and often highlighted regional talent that major labels weren't aware of. Once an independent label had a hit in a particular region, the major labels would often sign the artist. The most famous example of this is Elvis Presley, who was discovered by Sam Phillips, the producer at Sun Records in Memphis, Tennessee. After a few hit singles with Sun, Elvis signed with RCA, a major label, and became the biggest pop star of all time. Other independent labels include Atlantic, a New York independent specializing in rhythm and blues, Chess Records, specializing in Chicago blues, rhythm and blues, and early rock and roll. Stax Records had a studio in an old movie theater and produced a huge string of Southern soul hits. Motown was the Detroit label that operated like a car manufacturing factory, pumping out hit after hit in the rhythm and blues world. All these labels were essential to the promotion of innovative hit music in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Let's turn to another important technology for the music industry, radio. Radio had a huge influence on the kinds of records that would become hits, and its coverage served to unify regions of the country. Let's briefly look at the most significant moments in the development of radio. The theory and technology of what would become radio was in development starting in the mid-1800s, but the first commercial radio station began in 1920. In 1925, one of the most influential radio programs, especially for country music, began, the Grand Ole Opry, which you can still hear on WSM out of Nashville, Tennessee on Saturday nights. The show brought many of the best country music artists to the stage in front of a live studio audience. It helped unite much of the rural South as people tuned in all over the region to hear their favorite performers on the show. In 1939, FM radio came on the scene. FM stations couldn't cover as much area as AM stations, but the quality of the signal was better, and it offered stereo sound. At first, FM broadcasters would just repeat the signal from their AM stations, but in the 1960s, free-form radio programming started to develop on FM stations, which helped develop and spread the counterculture movement of the 1960s. One of the most significant changes to radio and the music industry came in the early 1950s with the Top 40 radio format, developed by Gordon McClendon of KLIF Dallas. Many radio stations found this form of radio programming, playing 40 of the most popular songs over and over again, to be a successful economic model. Because these few songs are played often, people tend to remember them and they become ever more popular. But there is often also a backlash after the songs become overplayed. Recently, a Canadian radio station, 90.3 AMP Radio in Calgary, is planning to push the Top 40 format even further by cutting songs short in order to cater to listeners' attention spans and fit more songs between commercials. Perhaps this is only the logical next step to the Top 40 idea in the Internet age. One of the historic downsides to Top 40 is that it led to the practice of payola. Payola was a common practice in the 1950s. In order to guarantee their music became a hit, record companies would pay disc jockeys, or DJs, to play their records. Payola is really a form of bribery, a mafia tactic that favored record companies that had the most money to spend. We'll take a look at how the government crackdown on this practice affected some of the most important DJs of the 50s and 60s in the next PowerPoint presentation. The payola scandal reveals the economic realities behind which songs we hear and how our taste is formed. Many of the marketing and distribution practices used today have a huge impact on which songs become popular. Though paying DJs to play records is not how the record industry does things anymore, there are even more complicated economic arrangements today determining which music you hear and which music you don't. Even if you aren't a frequent radio listener, you might still ask yourself the question, is my taste in music really mine? Or are my music preferences actually just a product of record companies that had the most money to spend, influencing what I like?